Hello, everyone, and welcome. And for those of you guys that are in the campaign, I just want to start off by saying thank you very much for all the games that we played so far. I'm having a blast running Dice Mice, and I really hope to be able to continue it going forward. And I want to try to make sure it's clear that I am always going to be working to make the game the best it can be. And so, with that in mind, today is going to be Patch Day. I'm not sure I will get all of the changes and all the different various resources updated today. Actually, I know I won't, but the question will be how long that'll take. I'm going to do my best. If you see something that is in these patch notes and is not in one of the resources, in a handout on Roll20 or in one of the pinned channels on the Discord or in one of the rule books, please poke me, please make a comment on it, make a note for it, ping me, whatever. You are not being annoying, you are being helpful. I'm doing my best to try to centralize the resources as best as possible, but there's always going to be some things that kind of slip through the cracks. Now, if you're just here for the patch notes, link down below. You can open them up and follow along if you want, but this is going to be a longer form explanation of why certain things are going on in the campaign. And I'm going to start off by going through the changes to the different classes and working with you guys through it. So let's start there. So patch 1.1 is going to be changing several different class features. Some things that are in this list have been changed already that are already in the current thing. These are things that I thought were either very minor or things that were very big. So anything that's just like, oh, it's a wording change, I might be able to just update the wording on the main document. Or if it's something that, oh, this thing is very broken or useless, then I've adjusted that as we go. So let's jump right in with the Alchemist. So the Alchemist, the first thing is the name of their ability, Empower Potion, has been changed to Invigorate. Empower is what it means when you've got 3 ranks of aid, and it is a little silly to have the same wording in both things, but it will still function the same way. Secondly, we changed Residual Magic to have the correct wording of things, but that was done as a hotfix, and you'll see on here, this update was pushed to live immediately rather than waiting for the patch. If you ever see one of those, that means it's already in the new rules. And lastly, at level 9, the level 9 ability is Mixologist. It says when you critically succeed when crafting a potion with a roll, instead of rolling, the effects are maximized. And the important part here is when a potion benefits from your Invigorate feature, you can choose to expend a willpower to maximize all dice. So it's mostly just changing the wording around a little bit to adjust with the new Invigorate wording, but it also is going to make that ability slightly stronger. Moving on to Barbarian. So Barbarian Rage Dice was something that we were looking at last round of the playtest, and they did need to be increased, so they're going to scale a little bit more appropriately now. Now, when I'm making these changes, I tend to make them kind of slow, and I tend to make them small increments. And the reason that I do this is because, in general, I prefer if a class is slightly underpowered or an ability is slightly underpowered, and I can buff it slowly until it is appropriate, rather than having something strong that gets nerfed. I want to nerf things as rarely as possible, which is sort of reverse from some of the earlier things of the playtest. If you've played in earlier playtest things, you might have noticed, oh, this ability used to be crazy powerful and now it's not as strong. It's because when we were doing playtesting, we want to playtest the strongest version of the ability that might make it into the game, and then power it down through later versions. Whereas when we're pushing it to something that is being played by a big group of people that you're planning on playing for a long period of time, like our current campaign is doing, we want to make sure that those abilities don't feel like you've invested in them or you've gotten really excited about them, and then they get taken away because they get nerfed. So start off. The Barbarian ability, Berserker, is going to get changed a little bit, and the Rage Dice are going to be increased. So it used to increase at 4, 9, and 12, and now it's going to increase at 3, 6, 9, 12, and 14. So you're going to get about 2 more Rage Dice as you go, and you're going to be getting them a little bit sooner. So the Berserker ability was made a little bit stronger. So first of all, you're going to gain temporary hit points when you rage equal to your con mod. So it's going to just give you a little bit more of a buffer when you enrage. And if you make a morale check or will save, you'll still get the same bonus. And if you're not raging, you can also enrage if you succeed at a morale check or a will save. Devastating Critical, we moved some of the features over from Berserker, like the cleave ability. So we did change the name of it to Devastating Assault. So if you crit with a melee attack, your die size gets increased by 1. So if you would do d10s, you instead do 12 damage with that attack because you maximize everything when you critically hit. And when you cleave while you're enraged, you can cleave an extra time and move an extra step, move an extra 5 inches. Skull Taker has also been increased. We liked the high version of Skull Taker, and we liked the idea of the sort of kiss kill. The ability of Skull Taker got even stronger in 2 ways. First, the rage dice that you're going to have by the time you get Skull Taker are going to be more dice, because the general buff to Barbarian rage dice. So you're going to be dealing more damage, and the damage you take from Skull Taker has been lower because we realized having the threshold of only killing an enemy ended up being not very fun in play. And we thought that having it work for both blooding an enemy and killing them gives more tools to be able to play around with. There are certain items and abilities that say you can treat a creature as bloodied if you do X, Y, or Z. And having that extra interaction for barbarians felt like it was going to be something beneficial in the long run. Lastly, Angry Grandfather is basically the same. The only difference is it's really been updated for the per adventure wording. We're moving everything away that we can from a per day wording to a per adventure wording. Functionally, it's very, very similar. But the idea is if this game and if this system is played in a non-West Marches style, we want to be able to have the DM be able to say, okay, this is the end of the adventure. This is the end of the arc. To be able to manage their resting and manage their ability use a little bit more fluidly with the pace of the narrative rather than tying it to once per day or X per day. So the next class, Bard. Bard has both had a lot of adjustments and not very many adjustments. Now, at the end of this, we're going to talk about the big math update that is going to be affecting everybody, but the Bard and some of the other leadership classes are getting significantly stronger or having their abilities changed a little bit because the overall leadership values are increasing. So while the Bard has not really experienced that many raw changes, they are going to notice a significant play difference because their leadership value has increased. Bardic Song has been updated to a per adventure wording, and it's been tweaked around a little bit to allow you to get the main part is an ally can benefit from this feature a number of times per adventure equal to your leadership. It should mean that at higher level, bards can more or less keep Bardic Song up at will if they have the movement and they have allies who are wanting to get the bonus from it. Constructive criticism. Now, this ability has gone through a ton of different versions, and we've really liked the playtest with several of the different versions. However, in the current version of the game, the playing of it where it's actually this is how you do it has been the most interesting way of going about it. So we've adjusted constructive criticism to function with both of the original functionality of not allowing a reroll and just giving a bump in the total modifier, and then giving the option for the reroll to be able to say, you did that wrong, try it again, because that has been really fun in play. So when one of your allies fails a skill check in one of your class skills, you can use a free action to increase their training in that skill by 1 tier until the end of the scene. So they still get that automatic bump. So if you notice that one of your allies would have succeeded if they were trained or if they were an expert instead of whatever they had, you can just give them that bonus and they can take that success. However, if that ally can choose to reroll that check but must keep the second result. So if they want, they can re-roll it and try again. But if they roll worse, even with their higher modifier, then that means that they have to keep the secondary result. And you can use the feature a number of times per adventure equal to your leadership, which at lower levels mean you're going to be able to use it 3, 4, 5 times. And then at a higher level bard might be able to use it as many as 6, 7, or 8 times in an adventure, be able to toss out a lot of different things. Now, right now, there is nothing that explicitly says that only one class skill per person at a time can be affected by constructive criticism. We've not added that in because it's a little verbose, but it might end up being something that's necessary wording moving forward, and it is in our consideration for patch 1.2. Arcane Mimicry was also changed a little bit so that the benefit is not exclusively on the bard. One of the notes from people was that especially the Bard entry ability, feels like the Bard is always taking from the group and is not often giving back, although they can be useful with their skill abilities in the mid levels. We thought it'd be fun with a high level ability. By the time you get to level 11, you're going to be doing a lot of crazy stuff to be able to have it work both ways. So Arcane Mimicry will now allow you to use one of your allies' mastery for your spells and allow you to give your mastery to your allies. Right now, there is nothing in here for having it use your allies' reaction in order to use the mastery from them. We did play test that a little bit. We talked about it quite a bit, and the answer that we kind of came to is that we want to try to restrict the amount of times that a player is asking another player to use one of their resources. So if the player says, "Oh, I want to use your mastery," then that's not going to feel like you're really taking anything from them. But if it's, "I want to use your mastery and I also want to use your reaction," which you may have other things that you want to do with your reaction, that can mean that it's less promoting that idea of team play. Next, the Brawler. Brawler is one of the classes that has seen the least development. And it's mostly just because people have really enjoyed the Brawlers. The people that have played them have really had a blast with them. So this time, Thievery has been added to the Brawler skill list. This was mostly to balance the way that everything stacked up once class competency gets added, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video, and you can read in the patch notes. Mostly, it was just they needed a little something to bump them up slightly, and we thought that adding Thievery to the class skill, especially with the high dexterity that Brawler has and the kind of cool ability of being able to use your tail to hold stuff, would fit in really well with the idea of a Brawler that is sort of able to use whatever they can get their hands, feet, or tail on top of. We also added Crippling Strike. We changed the way Crippling Strike works. Originally, Crippling Strike applied a condition called Rattled, and that it just really wasn't needed. It didn't need to exist effectively, and we tried to make the list of conditions smaller, and Rattled was one of the things that we took out, and also adding into the idea of promoting the idea of the aid and hinder system, which is also going to be a big part of this patch. Having the target be hindered too means that you have a default way to get hindered, and it plays into how everything else works and gets them close to an ability called Crippling Strike, getting them close to being actually crippled as the condition, which seems very fitting. The Druid. Now, the Druid has had very little stuff done to them. The Druid has had a lot of previous iterations done for changing things in the playtest, and I think that there is still some room for making the Druid abilities a little bit more concise. A lot of the Druid abilities are very wordy, but we also really like how they end up playing. So the main thing is for this patch is spiritual guidance has been taken away from nature. While we talked a lot about how it would be weird for there to be a druid that doesn't have nature, that doesn't fit very well in the mentality of things. Previous iterations, we just gave the druid ranks of nature for free, and that was fine. But it felt like you were kind of pigeonholing someone. If someone wanted to be a druid, but they weren't especially interested in nature, there isn't really a reason they shouldn't do that. And taking it away from nature and bringing it into just a static wisdom check is something that every druid is going to have, or they wouldn't able to be a druid. And all of their other abilities that are based on wisdom are going to be promoting that idea of, okay, just keep your wisdom modifier pumped and go up. Now, the other pieces is simplifying some other pieces, but you can see what the new Druid version is, and we're pretty excited about it. Exemplar. So the update to leadership, much like with the Bard, is going to hit the Exemplar pretty hard. It's going to make some of their abilities a little bit stronger. Unlike the Bard, that really had just a little bit of tweaking with the bonus leadership, the Exemplar is going to have some things that are changed around a little bit because they were basically too strong with the amount of leadership, and we didn't want to remove leadership from them because we felt it was important to Exemplar, so we just tweaked some of their abilities a little bit. The requirements for Exemplar were incorrect in the book. Those have been updated, so it should now be correctly Strength and Charisma instead of Charisma and Constitution. And then the You're Not Dead Yet feature was correctly brought up that it needed to be a little bit stronger, and it should help with a mortality check. That seems like it fits with the feel of that ability, and that ability was immediately pushed through. We talked about it very briefly and said, yeah, this is an obvious change. We went ahead and changed it. So Courageous Example and Inspiring Advance actually stayed the same, but they are going to be significantly stronger, as I mentioned, with their other abilities, but we didn't feel like they needed to be lowered quite yet. This is one of the few examples where we are going to be playing with something that might be a little bit too strong and then keeping an eye on it. But I feel like the examples where Courageous Example and Inspiring Advance are too strong are going to be very obvious that it's, oh, this is an overwhelming advantage if it ends up being like that. I do think personally that it is going to end up making the ability very strong, but not overbearing. But we'll have to see as it plays. We can do as much testing and we can do as much ruminating on things as possible. At the end of the day, it's all how players use it and how it actually feels at the table. That being said, Noble Presence would have been bonkers with the change in leadership. Noble Presence is a capstone ability, so it should be very powerful. But when we were sort of looking at what it looks like to be in a combat at high level, we noticed a couple of things. One, the math change that we're pushing through is also making it to where mice are scaling significantly faster than the monsters. So you're already going to be doing better at high level than you would at low level, just because the fact that the monsters are not scaling to be as strong as the mice are. And that is intentional. That's a goal of the system, to have you feel very frail and afraid and worried about everything, and any stray hit can kill you. And then as you start to level up, you start getting, oh, well, I'm just very dangerous hits, like very powerful attacks might be able to take me out in one strike, but like I'm starting to be a little bit stronger. And then by the time you get to level 7 or so, it's no longer, okay, well, I have enough tools that even a powerful attack is not going to take me out. And we have lots of ways of re-rolling things and avoiding stuff and giving aid and hinder and doing all these other special abilities that it's not going to be quite as deadly. Now, Noble Presence, with the change in leadership, basically made the entire party invulnerable. And while the capstone ability should be powerful, my entire party can no longer take damage is a little bit too strong. So it's still very, very powerful, but it is no longer going to be quite as overbearing, we hope. The next class is Fighter. So Martial Prowess and Hold the Line are unchanged, but the Fighter is one of the high leadership classes, so they are going to be getting a buff from that. We also changed the wording on the shield fighting style because it just basically got very confused during playtesting, and we never properly fixed it. So we're bringing it back into line. Now, there is a change later on where we're going to talk about the changes to shields, and this might end up meaning that the shield fighting style and some of the other shield abilities on the classes do end up getting changed in the next patch, but we're going to play with them a little while and see what they look like. It does not take any movement to raise your shield anymore if you're a shield fighter, and when you block an attack completely, so your shield blocks attack by adjacent enemy, you make an attack against that enemy as a reaction. If that attack hits, you can choose to move them back instead of something else. So there's just a bunch of different wording changes that got changed there. It does not need to be a deflect. It just needs to be a complete block. So if the attack does 18 damage and you have a full health light shield, even if it's not a deflect, you still took the full damage, you completely blocked the attack, you're able to do it. But if you had that same shield and it was a buckler or the same damage and it was a buckler instead of a light shield, so it was 18 damage and that meant that the shield was destroyed and maybe some of the damage went through to you, it would not qualify. The Battlefield Command has also been changed slightly to work with leadership. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a nerf or a buff. This is just a different ability. So originally, the Battlefield Command would let you once per round do the Battlefield ability. And then it was that was how it worked. The new version doesn't have the once per round wording, but it does mean that when you make the attack, you're making it as a free action. And the general rules for free action attacks is you get one per turn. So this is once per turn, not once per round. So Battlefield Command, the fighter can pump out like 4 or 5 of these commands very rapidly. In my turn, the next person's turn, the first enemy's turn, that sort of stuff. They can pump out as many in a round as there are people taking turns. But their overall cap is going to be lower. So we think that it's going to end up being a net positive for the fighter, a net buff slightly, but it is going to be worded a little differently. And there might be instances where if a battle is incredibly long, which it can be, sort of fighting epic monsters at high level, these fights can go on for a little bit. It might feel like a less of a thing, but the control that the fighter would have over when to use their commands and how many commands that they have should lead to more interesting tactical play. The Guardian. The Guardian's Shield Master ability was used to update to be Deflect, but other than that, it's remained unchanged. Similar to the Brawler, the Guardian hasn't really gotten a lot of rules changes as time has gone on. There is some notes about how to potentially update some of the higher level Guardian abilities to make them a little bit more appealing, but the idea of playing with Vengeance is something that we're going to be looking at for the next major patch, and I look forward to seeing kind of what people do with it. We've not really gotten to see, outside of one of the playtest sessions, what a high-level Guardian can do with Vengeance, and the one time that we saw them really take advantage of Vengeance, it was very, very fun. So Rogue, Scout, and Sorcery. Rogue, Scout, and Sorcerer were the three classes that had the most reworkings from the previous playtest. I'm personally not super happy with where Rogue is. However, it has the strength that it needs, right? The Rogue is not an underpowered class. I just think that they're a little bit uninteresting. They've got a lot of skill points. They've got a lot of skills that they can specialize in. So their ability to be versatile is there. But it might be a thing of me as a person. I'm not frequently a rogue player, so this might have to be something that another designer can come along and say, oh well, this is fine, or this needs some sort of reworking in order to make it evocative and fun for players. So Rogue, Scout, and Sorcerer basically all remaining the same. Warden. So the Warden feature, Stony Intercession, was originally missing its range. You could use it whenever you wanted, and that was just a copy-paste error from one of the previous playtests, so we pushed that to live to make sure it's correct. And while there's no changes coming through to the high-level Warden, we have made some changes similar to the changes we made for Rogue, Scout, and Sorcerer that have not gotten a lot of playtesting at high levels. When the high-level playtest that used the Warden went through, we didn't really get the chance to playtest any of the alternative options, and we did recognize some issues with the way that the Warden was playing, and needed to adjust those. So we're going to be looking at Warden for the next patch for the higher level play, but for the moment, they seem to be in a pretty good place, especially at low levels. Warden seems to be in a very good place, especially fulfilling their role as a both physical and magical attacker, if need be. Warlord. So the Warlord is a leadership class. They are the leadership class, which means that the leadership change is going to hit them the hardest. Them and Bards have had some pretty massive changes. Watch Out was a hotfix. We pushed that through immediately. It just wasn't using the Warlord's reaction, which was not very fun and not really intended. So Enabler, it's not changed, but again, that change might end up being a little bit too strong. We won't really know if Enabler is too strong until we're looking at higher levels. We think that it might need to be either capped at your Charisma modifier or using your Charisma modifier instead. But I don't think this is going to be as big of an issue at low levels as it might be at high levels. But we're aware that it's a thing, and we're going to be looking at seeing if the Enabler ability is too strong the next patch. Combat Commander got a little bit of a rewording. We worked at it a little bit, and basically the way that made the most sense for this to work in practice and to be worded in a way that makes it at least hopefully clear how it functions was to think of an idea of having certain charges. So you have these commands that you can issue. It's an ability with a certain number of charges that you can issue equal to your leadership. And the idea is that you can say, all right, I'm going to issue 4 commands in this combat because these 4 allies, if they have their initiative bumped up slightly, they will all beat one of the monsters, right? You're tweaking the initiatives if you are not surprised. And you have this pool of resources that you're drawing from, similar to the fighter's capstone ability, and we think that that's more interesting tactically than the way that it worked previously, or the way that it kind of read previously, even though this is very similar to the intention of the wording. And again, Heroic Rescue, the ability has been altered pretty significantly, not by any wording changes, just because the leadership values are much higher. Wizard. So adjustments to the rules needed to happen when looking at some of the defenses of things, and all of the grids for each of the different classes are going to be updated using the new math and making them balanced with the new monster math. One of the things that we noticed was that the wizard, who is designed and supposed to be the highest tier of will defense, wasn't actually doing that. A lot of the other classes had something that allowed them to function as if they're supposed to be a guardian and they're supposed to have very high defenses. They had a feature that allowed them to function there. Or if they were supposed to be a sorcerer with very high will defense, naturally a sorcerer would build up their charisma, which promotes their will defense, which would make it to where they're going to be a top tier will defense class anyways. The wizard, however, was missing something. Because the wizard exclusively needs intelligence and they don't really need any of their other stats, intelligence doesn't play into will defense. So what we did was we added something into wizard and changed the name of their starting ability from mental buffer to mental bastion. And the mental bastion ability gives all the same effects that mental buffer did. However, it also allows you, if your intelligence is higher than your wisdom and charisma, you can use that for your will defense instead. So it should mean that basically the wizard that doesn't have high wisdom and doesn't have high charisma is not going to be penalized and is still going to be able to be the premier will defense on the field. Prepared Ritual has been altered slightly just to clarify its use. It really hasn't changed very much. It's just basically changing the way that the level skill works and making sure it's clear that if you ritually cast a spell, which just means you take 10 minutes and you're able to use a dungeon turn to cast instead of a combat turn to cast, that you can use temporary willpower for it and you can change around your skills a little bit. Lastly, for the classes and lastly for the wizard is the familiar. So familiars as a concept were working reasonably well, but they were, I think, unnecessarily convoluted. And we have this full retainer system that we're working on that basically does everything that we need. So we changed familiar to be basically a free retainer. It doesn't cost you any of your leadership. It does get the bonuses from your leadership, which is not something the old version of familiar would have been able to get. And similar to the way that retainers work, because the familiar is working like a retainer, that means that just like a retainer, they don't exist basically in the combat. They're not part of the equation in any scene unless they act, unless they do something. So your familiar can exist and be standing next to the wizard and be unaffected by whatever happens in the battlefield until they take an action, until they use them, just like a retainer would be. And we thought that this change cuts down on the wording a little bit, cuts down on the overall confusion between having two very similar sounding features, and then I'll let you go from there. So that's it for the classes, and I'll be putting a video up in just a second for the rest of the patch notes.